Hi, it's Tim Hagen from Progress Coaching, and today I'm going to talk about something that I think is very integrated into the coaching world, and that is helping people become more self-aware. Now, when I did a definition search on self-awareness, I found a really cool one that I thought was really interesting, and it really depicts what we need to do as coaches, managers, and leaders. Let me just read it to you really quickly, and then I'm going to give you a real-world example of some work we've actually done. When we focus our attention on ourselves, we evaluate and compare our current behavior to our internal standards and values. We become self-conscious and objective evaluators of ourselves as a result. Now, let's be honest. How many of us are really objective about ourselves unless we really take a targeted effort? I have a friend in Los Angeles, Nate Ross, who does some awesome work in mindfulness. And he talks to me all the time about people have to dedicate time. They have to go through activities. They have to be really conscientious of making an effort to become self-aware. Now, let me give you a little bit of self-awareness in myself. I probably 30 plus years ago did an internship at IBM. And one of the things that I became very, very aware of were my pitfalls. I was a 2.1 grade point. You needed a 3.8 to actually get into the IBM program. Talk about people pulling strings for you. And here's the funny thing. My grades were so low when I applied, I'm surprised they let me use the bathrooms. So here's the funny thing. I became aware I was behind. I quickly became aware and very self-aware of what my pitfalls were, but more importantly, what my strengths were. So as time went on, I had a great boss, and my boss, Martha, would coach me, not weekly, every single day. And over time, I became aware, and I once asked her, I said, why do you bring me into your office every single day? And I became aware of something that was so interesting and quite frankly powerful. She said, I care enough about you to sit down with you on a regular basis to tell you the things that most people will never take the time to do. And I fell in love with coaching. That's how I got into the coaching field. So as we roll out our Progress Coaching training program, often I'll get questions from our clients like, well, how do I build self-awareness? This guy's not even aware he has a terrible attitude, or she's not even aware that people don't like her. How do you help someone become self-aware? Well, what do we typically do? We bring them in our office and we sit down and say, Bob, your attitude stinks. You got to cut it out or else. And I call that rhetorical management. I always laugh when I see sales leaders get up in front of the teams and they say, well, we're at 85%. We got to raise our numbers. And what I'm pointing out is we have to create an own language that imparts that change, that facilitates that change. So when I think about self-awareness, a lot of times what we go back to are certainly questions, but I want to introduce you to a really cool 3-step process to building self-awareness. I'm actually going to narrate it for you as it relates to a real-world example. So one of the most powerful things we can do is facilitate observation. Now, what I mean by that is literally giving an activity. Bob, I want you to watch Tom every time he's in a meeting. Susie, when Joanne is presenting, I want you to watch the 3 things that she does extremely well. The reason I share that with you is observation is very powerful. You cannot observe other people when you dedicate time and not learn something, not only just about them and what they do, but certainly about yourself. So one of the things you can do is frame out an activity and assign an element of observation. The second thing you can do is have a rule of engagement, meaning the rule of engagement could be a controlled environment. I want you to do this for 30 minutes. I don't want you to talk to other people. I want you to really observe for the following 3 things, or whatever the case might be. And again, I'm going to give you a real world example here in a few minutes. And then the third thing you can do is something called journal-based coaching. Every time you assign this observation, or if you assign it over a cadence or a period of time, like every week, I want you to go observe XYZ, and I want you to write down the following 3 things. See, when we journal, we tend to own things more. And when we put things about ourselves in print, we become more self-aware. So I'd say about 9 months ago, we were working with a financial institution, and it was more on the credit union side of the equation. And I had an executive say, I've got this person. highly talented, really intelligent, but they are not self-aware. And I said, give me an example. Well, he blurts out in meetings. He just throws out thoughts. He talks over people. And I said, well, let me challenge you. And I said, I'm not saying you're wrong, but why don't we sit down with this person? But I'd like to, first of all, build awareness. Do you think it's just because he's excited? Does he have ADD? Does he have some ideas that he's finally feels like someone's willing to listen to him? She said, no, I really think it's self-awareness, but I'd love to have you sit down with him. So we sat down and we were having coffee one day and we were talking about networking and we were just having a social conversation. And he did something I've never had anyone do to me. He started to point his finger in my face. Now, from across the coffee shop, one would think this guy's really angry. What he was literally doing was telling me, Tim, I really want to network with you. I really think it's great to work with you. I've heard so many good things about you. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy's going to poke me in the eye. And it hit me. It just hit me. She was right. There was no self-awareness. He had no clue of how he was coming off. But here was the funny thing. I sat back after I met him and I wrote down some notes. And I'd like you to do this as well. When people are not self-aware or they're not self-conscious of how they're coming off, much like the definition I just shared with you, what happens? We don't take dedicated time to look into those things. We just don't know what we don't know. So I wrote down the word intent. What was his intent at that coffee meeting? It was not to offend me. It wasn't to stick his finger in my eye or up my nose. I mean, he wants to help me. He was actually being excited. So what we did is we used our 3-step process. Now, again, you can build self-awareness through mindfulness training. Again, my friend Nate Ross in LA does an awesome job in that area. But I'm going to give you a 3-step approach. The first thing that we did, ironically, is we had him go to a Starbucks coffee shop. Now, I'm not a coffee drinker, but I will tell you, I love their training. I love the way they interact with their customers, and I love the way they interact with themselves behind the counter. So for once a week, this person had to go to Starbucks and then simply observe. The rule of engagement was try to eliminate idle conversation if people walk in and see you and know you. Try to limit that conversation as best you can. And I want you to journal 3 things. 1, what you observed that they do extremely well when they communicate with each other. Number 2, name 1 thing about one person that you observed that they did really well. And the third thing that we asked him to write down is 1 thing you learned about yourself. As a result of the observation, you're committed to changing. So the manager, she calls me up. She goes, well, then I got to meet with him one-on-one. I said, no, do not meet with him one-on-one. Now this sounds backwards, right? Because we teach people how to coach in a one-on-one or a group setting. And she said, what are you talking about? And I said, let's eliminate that because my gut tells me, much like our coffee meeting, he gets stimulated by other people. And what I mean by that is he sees another person. It's a person to share with. It's a person to explode with. And I said, I want to try to eliminate that. Now, I warn you, it's going to feel like scratching a chalkboard for him because he really gets excited by interacting with other people. Again, the intent is fantastic. The output is just, at times, just obnoxiously rude, but that's not who he is. So we asked him to do this for 4 weeks. And the human resource manager calls me and he said, I have to tell you something. I heard what you're doing with our employee. And I said, yeah. And he said, I just sat in a meeting with him and he did not interrupt. He was very quiet. And so we sat down with this gentleman after 30 days and we said, so we've asked you to do this 4 or 5 times. You've gone over to Starbucks. What have you learned? And he said, man, that was hard. So what'd you learn about yourself? He said, I just explode. I talk over people. And I looked at him and I said, John, I'm going to ask you a question, and it's kind of a leading question. Weren't you kind of already aware of that? He said a little bit, not to the degree I probably should have. And I said, well, that's cool. I said, what are you committed to doing? He said, I'm committed to getting better. I realized looking back at my behavior and how I came off in some of our meetings, it was completely non-cooperative. It was never my intent. Notice, he's almost mirroring the language his manager and I were talking about. He became self-aware. So what we do is we use observation, a rule of engagement to control the environment, and then to journal. We eliminated through a rule of engagement his one-on-one interaction with his boss. And the reason being is we wanted the experience to stand on its own. So again, self-awareness is a huge category, right? A million things could be causing it, right? But think about, how do you as a leader facilitate greater self-awareness? Now, in closing, one of the things I want to share with you that is my favorite question when it comes to self-awareness is the ability to really look in the mirror. And you ask people, as a result of that observation, as a result of reading that book, as a result of having a discussion with your peer, as a result of interviewing that person, what have you learned about yourself you're committed to changing? I'll repeat it. What have you learned about yourself you're committed to changing? Once you get that answer, now you got to hold on to that response. You got to nurture it, you got to reinforce it, you got to coach it, you got to praise it, and then you're going to start to build more self-aware employees. Let me know what your thoughts are on this video. Thanks for your time.